When you think of Plato's Republic, what comes to mind first? I think most people would say the allegory of the cave, or maybe the divided line. Perhaps some would cite the analogy of the city-state to the soul, or the teachings about virtue and the tripartite soul. There is certainly a lot going on in the Republic, and it took a brilliant and wise soul like Plato to weave them all together. But what if I told you that the height of this dialogue was none of these elements specifically, but rather another analogy that is the foundation for all of them? It is known as the royal pairs analogy. Now, I can already hear your response. The royal what? Yes, the royal pairs analogy. Now, to unpack and understand this analogy, we need to take it in steps. And I'm going to start us in Book 6, where Socrates sets up an analogy of the good to the sun. There, Socrates points out that our eyes need light in order to see. It is because of light that visible things are visible. Though vision may be in the eyes and its possessor may try to use it, and though color be present, yet without the presence of a third thing specifically and naturally adapted to this purpose, you are aware that vision will see nothing and the colors will remain invisible. What is this thing of which you speak? The thing that you call light. Socrates calls light the bond that yokes together visibility and the faculty of sight. The cause of this light he names the sun, but note here that he's talking about the sun as a god, not just the physical entity. He then calls the sun the offspring of the good. This then you must understand that I meant by the offspring of the good, which the good begot to stand in a proportion with itself, as the good is in the intelligible region to reason, which is nous in the Greek, by the way, and the objects of reason, so is this in the visible world to vision and the objects of vision. And so Socrates set up the sun as analogous to the good, and he has given us this analogy. As the good is to reason and the objects of reason, so is the sun to vision and the objects of vision. Now this is the intelligible region, and this is the visible world. Both the good and the sun are presented as transcendent causes to their respective realms. Socrates then goes on to talk about this analogous relationship further, starting with the visible world. Vision is either clear or dull, depending on the amount of light present. You are aware that when the eyes are no longer turned upon objects upon whose colors the light of day falls, but that of the dim luminaries of night, their edge is blunted, and they appear almost blind, as if pure vision did not dwell in them. Yes, indeed. But when, I take it, they are directed upon objects illumined by the sun, they see clearly, and vision appears to reside in these same eyes. And then Socrates is able to make a similar statement about the intelligible realm. Apply this comparison to the soul also in this way. When it is firmly fixed on the domain where truth and reality shine resplendent, it apprehends and knows them and appears to possess reason. But when it inclines to that region which is mingled with darkness, the world of becoming and passing away, it opines only, and its edge is blunted, and it shifts its opinions hither and thither, and again seems as if it lacked reason. Notice that the soul only seems to gain or lack reason, or nous in Greek. This is because it does not actually possess nous. The soul is intellectual in the sense of being able to participate in nous. Okay, now Socrates gets to an important statement. This reality, then, that gives their truth to the objects of knowledge and the power of knowing to the knower, you must say is the idea of good, and you must conceive it as being the cause of knowledge and of truth in so far as known. Now, this is such a rich sentence. I could easily get sidetracked and just talk about this sentence and forget about the rest of the video. Basically, the idea of good gives objects of knowledge their truth. It is the cause of their being true. And it also gives the power of knowing to the knower. When you have a vision of the absolute realities, when you come to know them because the idea of good gave you, as a soul, that power. And so if the good is analogous to its offspring, the sun, then the idea of good must be analogous to sunlight. As sunlight makes objects of vision visible, so too the idea of good makes objects of knowledge knowable. These analogies then lead Socrates into the divided line, which I've discussed in many other places. So what does all of this have to do with the royal pairs analogy? Well, the royal pairs analogy is summed up in one paragraph, and it comes up in Book 7. It is basically Socrates returning to all that I just discussed, but he ties it together in a very beautiful way. In the region of the known, the last thing to be seen, and hardly seen, is the idea of good, and that when seen, it must needs point us to the conclusion that this is indeed the cause for all things of all that is right and beautiful, giving birth in the visible world to light and the author of light, and itself in the intelligible world being the authentic source of truth and reason. And that anyone who is to act wisely in private or public must have caught sight of this. If you master only one paragraph in the Republic, let it be this one. This is the basis for everything else. So let's break it down. He says that the idea of good gives birth in the visible world to light. It is additionally the cause of the author of light. From Book 6, we can conclude that this author refers to the sun, the offspring of the good, which stands in proportion to the good. In the intelligible region, the idea of good is the source of truth and reason. And so we can see that Socrates is stating that the idea of good is the cause of the sun, and then of sunlight. There is a causal chain here. In fact, we can extend this chain. The idea of good is the cause of truth and reason in the intelligible world. And then it is the cause of the sun, which stands over the visible world. And then we can add light, and I'll also throw in visibility to tie in the analogy as presented in Book 6. So we are seeing that our physical world owes its existence and its power to exist to the idea of good. But we are not done yet. We have 5 terms here, 2 in the intelligible realm and 3 in the physical. You can probably already guess what is missing and where it would fit, but we can see it even more clearly. A beautiful thing happens when we look at the Greek. Idea of good here is feminine. It is literally queen or lordess herself. Light is also feminine, and author of light is actually a masculine word for king or lord. Since visibility is not in the paragraph we are currently looking at, I will take it out. I will also take out truth and reason for the moment because that is the analog to visibility. This allows us to better see the analogy that Socrates is building. So now we see that the idea of good is a queen in the intelligible realm. The sun is king in the visible realm, and light is feminine. So we are building a set of royal pairs. The king in the intelligible realm, however, is left unnamed. And this is appropriate, for the king must be the good, and the good is transcendent and beyond experience or knowledge. And so, what Plato demonstrates through these royal pairs is the chain of causation, leading all the way up to the exempt first cause of all. Proclus describes this in Book 2 of his Theology of Plato. The present discourse, however, suspends all things after the above-mentioned manner from the good and the first unity. For if indeed the sun connects everything sensible, but the good produces and perfects everything intelligible, and of these the second monad, namely the sun, is denominated the offspring of the good, and on this account causes that which is sensible to be splendid, and adorns and fills it with good, because it imitates the primogenial cause of itself. If this be the case, all things will thus participate of the good, and will be extended to this one principle, intelligibles indeed, and the most divine of beings, without a medium, but sensibles through their monad, the sun. And the brackets, by the way, are the additions of the translator Thomas Taylor. Now, I want to also bring in Dr. Pierre Grimes. In his final publication, Socrates and Jesus, A Dialogue in Heaven, he cites this analogy as fundamental not only to the Republic, but to all of Socrates' teachings. He writes in the voice of Socrates, "So what have I come to? It is in this most fundamental analogy, is that which is beyond all names and categories is the cause of that most brilliant light of being. So too is this most brilliant light of being to the sun, or Helios." Notice that he has reduced the royal pairs analogy down to 3 terms, so that he can use the idea of good as a mean, stressing the chain of causation between the intelligible realm and the visible. He goes on to explain, "Here is the most splendid of mean analogies. Its depth is marvelous to behold and understand. The analogy expresses that there is a parallel structure between heaven and earth, between the realm of the mind and its transition to the cosmos. The primary term is named the good itself, and the second term, the divine luminosity, is also called the idea of good. For when we stress this term, idea, we do so because in the Greek, the word idea means to behold. To behold the good is to behold it as the divine luminosity." He then concludes, again in the voice of Socrates, "To understand this analogy and to come to realize the depth of these 2 ratios is the task of my philosophy." Indeed, to understand this analogy is to recognize that as above, so below. This describes not only the unfolding of reality, but also our eventual return. And this return is the quest of every soul, and it is this very understanding that prepares us for it. This is the life of philosophy, to behold the very presence of the good, and to allow the knowledge of that experience to inform our lives on the earthly plane. So I'm curious how many of you have learned about this analogy before. It seems to be neglected by most teachers of Plato, and I think it's overshadowed by all the other elements of the Republic, the political analogy, the cave, and so on. So let me know in the comments if this is your first introduction to this royal pairs analogy. And either way, I do hope you found this video helpful. And as always, I thank you for watching. Till next time.